although I am a UK news editor, for the past 3 years I was based in Nairobi and traveled around writing a lot about free trade from Abidjan, Ghana, Uganda. So regional integration is a subject in Africa is a subject dear to my heart. And it gives me great pleasure to discuss this with someone who probably needs no introduction to many of you, Dr. Benedict Oramah, who's the president of the Afreximbank. So, Dr. Oramah, please come to the stage without further ado. Yes. Well, thank you very much indeed. For those of you who maybe do not know Afreximbank, its vision is to be the trade finance bank for Africa, and it's to stimulate it says its mission statement is to stimulate a consistent expansion, diversification, and development of African trade while operating as a first-class, profit-oriented, socially responsible financial institution. That maybe seems like a pipe dream for many people when talking about Africa, but now we're seeing with the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, having been ratified by enough countries to come into effect. Do you think that regional integration, Pan-African integration, we heard about the president talking about ECOWAS, but is it right to now be genuinely thinking about Pan-African integration, or is it still, do you think, many years ahead? Is there still a lot of work to be done?
Thank you very much. Let me thank the Invest Africa team for inviting us here, and also to all of you who are here. Thank you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about Afreximbank and about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that had just come into force. Yes, the act of signing that agreement was a political act. The important thing is making sure that we convert that political act to economic benefits to everybody. The issue is that the discussion about integrating Africa has been on for years. As a matter of fact, right about 60 years ago, 50-something years ago, when the Organization of African Unity was formed, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana, kept hammering that unless Africa integrated, that it would not develop. There was no way a continent of 55 countries today, some of them were hardly viable on their own, could survive and compete in a very, very highly competitive global world. So the idea of integration had always been there. And from the Lagos Plan of Action in the 1970s to the Abuja Treaty in the 90s, the plan continued to be mapped. But just last year, it became a reality. So it has come out of a felt need. We now need to make it work, and that is where the businesses come in. The problem Africa has today is the problem that has its origins to its colonial history, the fragmentation that came out of that, and the fact that all the relationships that were built over the years were built with the metropolitan powers. It may surprise you if I tell you today that if you ask an average Nigerian where Burundi is, some of them may think it's in Asia. They don't know people don't know anything about what happens just across their borders. So what are we doing about it ourselves? Because we're a bank created to foster that integration. We decided that infrastructure is important. People talk about infrastructure as a major constraint to the integration. We agree it's a problem, but we think that the infrastructure problem is a generalized problem. Today, the stock of infrastructure in Africa carries $1 trillion of trade. The total African trade today is about $1 trillion. The question is, why is intra-African trade share of that $1 trillion of trade, only $170 or $150 billion, depending on the year. We think it's because people don't know what is happening across their borders. That is why Kenya will import from outside Africa what Burundi exports, for example. Nigeria will import from outside Africa what Ghana exports. So we decided to deal with the information problem. Because as a matter of fact, to deal with the infrastructure problem is actually, I would say, a pipe dream, if we think the governments will deal with it. People say that it will take about $100 billion of investments per annum for 10 years. That is about $1 trillion to do that. That is more than the combined budget of all the African countries. So where is the money going to come from? So you have to have the private sector come in. But the private sector can only come if they see that the business exists. So we decided to deal with the information problem. The first thing we've done is we launched the first ever Inter-African Trade Fair, which held in Cairo last year. Working with the African Union, we organized that trade fair and also in collaboration with the government of Egypt. That trade fair brought together more than 7,000 businesses from all across Africa. 45 countries attended and participated in the fair. The idea is to begin to make African businesses to connect with themselves, to begin to know themselves. And within that, within the 7 days, $32 billion of transactions were concluded. And Afreximbank, as at today, has actually financed transactions of more than $5 billion out of that $32 billion within 7 months of that trade fair. The second round of that fair will hold in Kigali next year, in September next year. The fair will be held every 2 years. So Rwanda won the bid to host the second one, which we hold in Kigali next year. So we expect that we will build on the success of the 2018 trade fair to bring even more businesses from all over Africa, and also from outside Africa, because we welcome participants from outside Africa, especially those who are going to exhibit investment goods, the kind of goods Africa needs to create manufacturers, the kinds of goods Africa needs to build infrastructure that we need to connect the different countries. So all of you, some of you who are here, who want to participate, either as businesses in Africa or from the UK or any other place, you are welcome. Invest Africa is our partner in it. They're supporting us.
But that's crucial and important, but also you've got things like the nitty-gritty of integration. You mentioned one thing, infrastructure, education, but things like rules of origin, most favored nation status. I mean, as a banker, do you see these becoming insurmountable obstacles or actually getting the nitty-gritty of a trade deal? I mean, if you look at how long it takes most trade deals to get over the finishing line, how long do you really think it'll take before people in Lomé or Bujumbura, you mentioned Burundi, or anywhere, will actually be seeing the tangible effects and benefits of this drive towards greater integration?
Africans are hungry to expand trade amongst themselves. Some of the negotiations you're talking about are going to be concluded. The rules of origin, the schedule of concessions is currently being negotiated in Addis Ababa. They will be signed in Niamey in July. We think that the environment for the trade to begin to happen will be there. But don't forget that integration didn't start today in Africa. We have sub-regional groupings. You have the ECOWAS, you have the SADC, you have the COMESA, you have the East African Community, you have the Maghreb Union, and so on. Integration has been happening in those pockets. So some of those problems people have overcome them to some extent. There are regions that have integrated more than others. So these experiences are being brought to bear under the CFTA. So I expect that we'll begin to see the fruits of this. That's why Afreximbank is investing in facilitating, in creating things that will facilitate the trade. For example, we will be launching, the African Union will be launching the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System that Afreximbank has developed. It will be launched also at the same time the CFTA, the coming into force of the CFTA will be launched in Niamey by the African Union. That payment platform will enable businesses to pay for intra-African trade in their local currency, to make it possible for a business person or a farmer in Togo, for example, to pay for goods in Ghana using the CFA, and the Ghanaian who is selling the goods will get Ghanaian cedi. So this will begin to return some of the trade diverted away from Africa because of the use of third currencies in conducting the trade. So Afreximbank will be doing the clearing for this. And only the countries that are in deficit at the end of the clearing period will be required to pay in dollars. The effect of this is that we will reduce the foreign currency content of intra-African trade. And we expect that this will boost intra-African trade, make it easier for Africans to trade among themselves. And because we are also putting in place a trade information portal that will support some of the initiatives that Afreximbank and the African Union are doing, it will make it easier for businesses to begin to know what is possible in other African countries. And then when they know what is possible, they are going to be able to transact and be able to pay for goods and services in their different countries. So I expect that in less than 2 or 3 years, people will begin to see the impact of what has just happened in terms of signature.
You heard it here first. But you mentioned the regional economic groupings, and if you're an investor maybe here in London or outside Africa and you get muddled by the alphabet soup of AfCFTA, ECOWAS, East African Community, you name it. I mean, where should people go first? What should people wait and see first, do you think, sort of, if they're wanting to learn more? Is the free trade agreement going to surpass everything, or is it just an adjunct?
No, the free trade agreement it will surpass everything. That is the intention. The intention, in fact, the integration started in stages, actually. It was deliberate to have those sub-regional groupings first. And the idea was that ultimately the sub-regional groupings would disappear and the CFTA would then be the thing. However, the disappearance of the sub-regional groupings will be gradual. They will not just disappear today, just because the CFTA came into force. But we expect that over time they will disappear. And the reason they will not just disappear is that some of them have integrated further than the CFTA will allow today. What we are having, the CFTA is dealing with the trading goods, trading services, and dispute settlement issues. That's the first phase of the CFTA. The next phase we'll do with investment issues and so on and so forth. Some sub-regional groupings have already gone beyond that. So you're not going to say, okay, stop. But ultimately, when this CFTA then gets to where the best integrated sub-regional grouping is, then everything will gradually, because there will be no need anyway.
But you could argue that You know, one of the biggest challenges of further integration appears to be the reluctance of Nigeria to engage, one of 3 countries that still hasn't signed up. Without going into sort of domestic politics, how big a challenge for integration is this reluctance of Nigeria to, shall we say, get on board?
Yeah, Nigeria is a very large economy in Africa, population-wise, trade-wise. But I think Nigeria would join, maybe by the time the next meeting holds in July.
What are you hearing from Nigeria at the moment? Which way is the wind blowing?
I think they will join. You see, Nigeria has invested a lot in regional integration. As the Lagos Plan of Action was where the very, very serious discussions about CFTA started. Nigeria actually hosted it. Nigeria invested and brought everybody to Lagos to talk about it. The Abuja Treaty that set the roadmap that culminated in the signature of the CFTA last year was in Abuja. Nigeria also hosted it. So I don't see why Nigeria would all of a sudden now pull out. The issue is that some consultations have to be held. Studies have been done. The last one, I understand, was submitted around January, February, but just about the time the elections we are starting. So now that the elections have been held, and now that the government has been sworn in, one expects that they will finalize the consultation and they start. And the other thing is, any country remaining today will have no choice. That country will be captured by the Walrus Law. You know Walrus Law?
Tell me more.
Say, in an economy with n number of markets, equilibrium in n-1 market will ensure there's equilibrium in the nth market. So if you are the only one and 54 countries sign, you become a member, even if you don't want to be a member. But I think Nigeria will be a member voluntarily. They will not be captured.
Another challenge for greater integration is that a very significant proportion of trade in Africa is in the informal sector. I mean, when I was on the Kenya-Uganda border recently, it's amazing, you know, the informal trade that was just going over rather than formal structure. How can more of this be brought either into the formal sector or to be structured to improve the flows of informal trade and to help the vast majority of traders who are, you know, small and medium enterprises?
Yes, informal intra-African trade is estimated between 40 to 60 billion. We're actually conducting a study to get a better handle of it. We've reached the conclusion that the high value of informal trade in Africa is evidence of institutional failure. If there are trading companies that are able to conduct trade between countries, there'll be no need for a small trader in Accra to travel with $3,000 to Lagos to buy a few things and return to Accra with all the inefficiencies. It's just because there are no trading companies doing this. So they had to, each individual had to look after itself. So what are we doing about it? We launched an export trading company strategy in Afreximbank. We are promoting the emergence of export trading companies, the kind of things had in Asia, Japan, South Korea, and so on. We are hoping that the export trading companies would then form the platform for formalizing some of this informal trade, because they will begin to aggregate the trade that is today being conducted by the informal traders, make it unnecessary for those small traders to be going from one country to the other with small amounts to buy things in an inefficient way. The other thing we're doing to formalize the trade is the payment platform. The payment platform we're doing will make it possible for businesses to stay where they are and actually pay for goods in any part of Africa in their local currency. And we expect that this would then boost the activities of e-commerce in Africa. Today, most of the e-commerce businesses we have in Africa are country-specific. The reason is because there's nobody who really will have the ability to do what we're just about to launch. Allow people to pay across borders in local currency. Because Afreximbank is able to do that because of the nature of our institution, and multilateral. We're not regulated by any central bank, so it's a supranational. So we're able to deal with all these other currencies, and in partnership with all the countries, the African Union, and all the central banks, we're able to put this in place. So we expect that the ease of transacting from the comfort of their homes or wherever they are will make it possible for these people to use phones, use whatever they have to transact. And when they do that, you begin to formalize the trade because you begin to see the data, and people will begin to intervene in terms of those who want to give small credits to them and so on.
I'll take a couple of questions in a sec, and we're also going to be showing a short video about the Kigali Trade Fair next year for those of you who want more information before the session finishes. But one final question from me. Is the trade war between China and the US an opportunity or a problem for intra-African trade and cooperation, and why?
Well, I think it's an opportunity. In fact, it came at the right time because it made the African leaders to realize the importance of the regional integration they've just embarked upon. The new world that appears to be emerging based on all the things going on is a world where multilateralism is in the retreat and is now bilateralism, the might is right. So if 55 African countries, very small countries, with GDP of the maximum of $500 billion, go to compete in a world where you have the US, you have China, you start negotiating with them on a bilateral basis, you're not going to get anything. So you're just going to be dictated to. So by integrating, Africa will now be in a better position, first, to absorb the shocks of the kind of trade wars we are seeing, the trade war we are seeing today, because the improved intra-regional trade will help Africa to reduce the impact of whatever may happen if trade with China, the trade with the US reduces. But more importantly, it will give Africa the opportunity to present one voice when they now start negotiating, assuming the world now goes the way of less multilateralism, which appears to be what the big powers are hoping for.
Long may it last, is what you say, perhaps. Any questions? Do we have time for a couple of questions, please, before the end? Yes, the gentleman there. Do you have a microphone, possibly, please? Okay. So, or do you want to stand up and... Oh, here comes the microphone.
Question for the professor. Yeah, Gregory Cronston, FBN Capital. Question is, I understand, I think, under the agreement, I think 90% of goods are tariff-free, is that correct? So the question is that 90, it's quite a big distinction, is that 90% by value or 90% by number of products? And if I can sneak in a second question is, I read somewhere that once you sign up the agreement, you have 5 years in which you can make an exit. So is that true or not? Thank you.
5 years to do what? Sorry.
5 years. So if you sign up the agreement, you can change your mind within 5 years. And
well, I don't know whether I can answer that or you want. Okay. He said 90% of tariff lines. Tariff lines. Yes. tariff lines. And then the ones that are remaining are the sensitive goods and so on. Now about signing and 5 years, every agreement has an exit clause. Even the 5-year thing, anybody can exit. But don't forget that the agreement, after signing, the governments are expected to have them ratified. And the process of ratification means going to your parliament. Across Africa, almost the same thing. So once you are in, it's difficult to get out. But anybody can exit. There is an exit clause. Anybody can exit the agreement when they want to. I don't expect that countries will rush out. There are issues. For example, there are countries that are worried, that smaller countries, that they may suffer, in terms of revenue losses and so on. So we are putting in place an adjustment facility to support countries that suffer shocks, especially fiscal revenue shocks, as a result of the implementation of the agreement. We are looking to put in place a facility of $1 to $1.5 billion. The World Bank is also considering something, but we will be putting ours in place until the World Bank completes this process. When they complete the process and they put a larger amount, of course, ours will expire. Otherwise, ours will complement whatever the World Bank wants to put in place.
Thank you. I think no one in this country needs reminding that all agreements have exit clauses. And on that note, I think is the video ready to be shown, please?
African Trade Fair, IATF 2020, to be hosted by the government of the Republic of Rwanda in Kigali from the 1st to the 7th of September 2020.
I think that you agree with me that the 2018 Inter-African Trade Fair has been a tremendous success. For us, it surpassed all our expectations in every measure.
It has all been a great success, and that each of you must have had insightful discussions.
IATF 2020 is expected to attract over 1,100 exhibitors and 5,000 conference participants from more than 55 countries, and to generate over $40 billion in trade and investment deals. IATF 2020 will provide a unique and valuable platform for businesses to access an integrated African market of over 1.2 billion people, with a GDP of over 2.5 trillion, created under the African Continental Free Trade Area.
The first Inter-African Trade Fair is the first deliverable of the African Continental Free Trade Area, even before the agreement has entered into force.
IATF 2020 will consist of an exhibition, a trade and investment forum comprising of the IATF 2020 conference, featuring leading African and international speakers, and a variety of sessions on, among others, African trade and investment, opportunities under the African Continental Free Trade Area, and training workshops covering exporting, standards, and marketing. Business to business and business to government matchmaking and exchanges, allowing buyers and sellers, governments and investors to meet and conclude business and investment deals. Country days for selected countries to showcase their trade, investment, tourism, and cultural opportunities. A virtual trade fair, providing buyers, sellers, exhibitors, and countries an interactive online platform where they can showcase their goods, services, and investment opportunities. Creative Africa, which includes a fashion show, music, film, a Creative Africa Summit, and a dedicated creative industry exhibition. African heads of state, ministers responsible for trade, industry and finance, central bank governors and captains of industry will be participating from the 1st to the 7th of September 2020. Afreximbank, the African Union and the government of the Republic of Rwanda invite you to join us in Kigali, Intra-African Trade Fair, Transforming Africa. To register and get more information, visit www.intraafricantradefair.com. Promoted by Afreximbank in collaboration with the African Union and the government of Rwanda.